it seemed to fall into what could have been many, many different categories, but we tried to figure out ones that seemed to work pretty well. And so you can see for each of the 4 main categories, there are, I think, about 4 to 6 maybe of these subcategories, which are in column B. And then column C and D were our attempt to sort out into concise statements that eventually might be measurable what all of the input was. And so you'll see in column C, it's really about the individual. So if we're talking about the workforce itself, these are what individuals in the workforce, the characteristics that they would have. So I'll just start with the top row because that's so much easier. But you can see the employees themselves have skills they need to perform their jobs. That's one of the things we started with. People seek out opportunities to job shadow and learn about others. So these are about the actions of individuals. And then in column D is the actions of the organization itself, because that's really what we have more control over. So things like there is a robust job shadowing and job swapping program. So, you can see how there's an individual action that people actually take advantage of these things and want to do them. And there's an organizational action, which they exist in, they're supported. And so then the column E was an attempt to sort of synthesize that down. And it doesn't necessarily capture everything in column C and D, because then it would be like a crazy large statement, but it tries to get the essence of what is being talked about in that input that we got in the workshop. And so in this case, it's employees enthusiastically participate in a robust and well-funded system to support learning and growth in the organization. And this includes learning from each other, job shadowing, formal training, and career pathing. So it kind of synthesizes it all down to, if you had a level 5 organization, what would that look like? So that's pretty much it. I don't know unless people want other sort of examples to go through, but that was the whole philosophy behind putting this together.
So Alice, I think that Lisa will help facilitate us, but you can actually give more thought, what comments on, depending on what comments people make. But the idea is to go through each of these four levels and the categories and get feedback from people on the line. So if people could just use their chat to do that, like we've done before, or raise your hand to make comments. So in this mastery, you have people can read this, and if they have comments, they can make them.
Yeah, so Alice, what we were thinking is that said maybe we could look at least, maybe we cannot get through all of them. They go to autonomy, purpose, and fairness. But maybe we can just pick, or maybe you can just pick one from each layer initially, and just
So training, education, development, you started, Alice. So maybe that, could be the one for this particular layer.
Yeah, sure. And I don't know if what's most useful for people to read it themselves, or for me to go through what all the input was. It seems like the training and development is kind of a pretty straightforward one that people can understand better. Maybe we should look at one that is maybe a little bit a little more challenging. So how about the third one down there? That doesn't have as much substance to it. There aren't as many elements within it. So that might be more useful to get input from people. But one thing we saw was about supervising and coaching. And so, it's both that supervisors themselves provide challenging work for their employees, and that they discuss learning opportunities with them. And then we said the organizational one is the performance review system. And so the statement there is that employees and supervisors collaborate in finding work that challenges them and develops their skills. So did people want to sort of comment on that, if that reflects what they were thinking when they sort of were giving input in the workshop?
I mean, even if you give thumbs up or something, on chat, that would be helpful to see, what your feedback is, or if you think that there are things that are missing here, right? You could chime in.
Maybe we did just a fantastic job that people have no input.
I just want to reiterate that the core team worked through the Christmas and New Year's holidays to look at almost 400 comments, organize them to something that's manageable, and classify them in categories. So we've made quite a bit of progress. And then the column E is sort of the kind of examples that could be included in the level 5 maturity sort of description. And then there would be these characteristics. So the feedback that we got from the report outs is that people really like the opportunity to contribute, to have interaction and stuff like that. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted to have a conversation like this, to have a broader group of workforce to comment and provide input on the things that have been done.
And I see there is a comment in the chat here, which is a great one. Layla says that beyond having performance review system, there should also add in regular meetings to discuss performance, and that's great. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So we need to add that in.
So Lisa, do you think we maybe want to move to the next layer?
Yes, this is actually great, and there's so much in there that what strikes me as someone who's been trying to focus in this way for a long time, are there a few simple rules that we could, because what I run into as I'm trying to help the organization evolve is that these aspects attach to people differently, and they have some different mental models already at play. So if we could boil it down to a few simple rules, and I'm not saying we do that right now, but that's just a thought that's come to my mind, that to have the greatest impact, I think if we could find a few simple rules that people would need to really pay attention to and focus on, I think we could bring about some significant change. And I think, yes, let's move on. Should we jump into the autonomy area and pick out one there? And then after we get through all of these, maybe we can go back, if there's time, we can go back to the mastery again and pick another one and keep, working our way through that way.
Mert did have a comment here if he wants to chime in, but then we should move on.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, it's for the supervisory and coaching layer discussion. Just wanted to further clarify there. Basically, I guess we are not just talking about technical skill supervision, supervisory coaching, but also, the business management of aspects of things. I just gave an example there. For example, it would be good to know for people to learn, contract risk risk awareness, how to manage what sort of language to use to manage that risk and so forth. Not just like learning a new data analysis software or something.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that actually I think flows well into the discussion of what we heard in the autonomy section. Is that, and the one thing is that in the workshop there was a lot of overlap, and then so there was like feedback that was sort of offered up maybe in the mastery section that we ended up moving to autonomy because there were other things said in the autonomy section that were similar, and so I don't think we quite captured exactly what you're talking about, Mert, and that should be added in. But this is where we ended up putting the leadership. Being at all levels and people and supervisory philosophy. So, you're also talking about sort of more management, like a project management skills, which I don't think we captured enough. But this is the place where we talked more about people. I don't know how to capture it exactly. The top one is about, trying to work on not just allowing people to fail in a responsible way. And I know this is something in the workshop, and I think that maybe is the one we can talk about here on autonomy, is that when employees make mistakes, it's seen as a learning opportunity. Peers have honest conversations about problems.
Let me just freeze the thing. So people, I'm trying to make sure that people can, sorry, that people can see. You see what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on the organizational side, it's about rewarding people for trying something new. And we did hear in the workshop that there's a balance to that, of course, because we're in the business of public health. And so sometimes, like, if you innovate and fail, it can have real world consequences. And so the question here, I guess, is, when we say employees are formally and informally rewarded for trying to solve difficult challenges, even if they don't succeed, does that capture well enough that that sort of balance you have to strike in our business?
Oh, this is Mert again, Alice. I mean, that does sound good to me as a concept. I mean, I guess short-term way of thinking about that in my career so far has been like, give somebody just enough rope to hang themselves with, and then you help them, get back up on their feet. If there is a mistake, as long as the mistake is not like a major one. This also goes well with, I think, something that I often find missing in organizations, and that is this concept of discretionary effort that you have here as a category. Like, a lot of good and innovation actually comes out of that. And different organizations can dedicate different amounts of time to it, but those two things kind of like go hand in hand big time for innovation, efficiency, and basically everything else that comes from that.
Those last couple, Alice, seem to be kind of important. In other words, leadership isn't just about the people at the top of the organization. It's at all levels, and what's the supervisory philosophy, in terms of how work is going to be conducted, let's say on teams, as opposed to within a functional unit or specific category of the organization.
And that is something I wanted to ask. I mean, that I guess it's E12, the supervisors are supportive, not directive. Do people understand that well enough? Does that make sense to people, or is it a little too sort of vague and fluffy?
I just want to mention that a lot of the comments previously, when we were doing those sticky notes in Mural, had to do with people being able to make decisions on different levels and not have a sort of top-down. A lot of it was about top-down versus kind of distributed decision-making and authority and stuff like that. So when we're doing those red and green sticky notes, most of them were actually related strongly to those types of points.
And I didn't put a comment in on it, Alice, but where it's supervisors are supportive, not directive, but may be included in the communication chain, so it's not like supervisors are left out. Maybe that's something that could be enhanced in that brief description.
Yeah, I just typed
Yep.
sort of Cello's feedback into there, so it would be captured in the.
Yep.
A lot of this comes into play in autonomy. So getting employees to feel empowered, and it also drives engagement, has a lot to do with, well, what decision making am I able to do? Yeah. And in order for me to make a decision, who do I need to consult? And can I make that decision? So I really think a lot of that comes from the rules we put in place that'll come into the autonomy layer. Maybe that's a good segue into the autonomy layer. Do you want to pick one there, Alice, and we can have another conversation that revolves around the autonomy section or layer?
Yeah, so I guess we were just, the ones that I had pointed out just now were in the autonomy layer about the supervision being supportive and not directive, and about leadership being at all layers of the organization. And I think you're right. I think that is where we would put something about decisions being more bottom up as much as possible, and supervisors being kept in the loop, although not a barrier to things happening.
If I can just mention quickly an example from the Metropolitan Water District. A year and a half ago, there was a meeting of all the managers in the district. And at one point, there was this interactive exercise when they said, what is the biggest pain point? What is the biggest difficulty that you see that would need to be fixed? And number one was, I don't have enough authority to make decisions I want to make. And this was a meeting of managers. And this was the number one rated comment. So I think autonomy is in the governance and power distribution and relationship is a very important thing.
Oh yeah, so it's not just at the, it's also an issue at the top level, not just at the bottom level. Then it sounds like, Cello.
Yeah, I think the situations could be that there's a discrepancy between how much people, where is the information required to make decisions, and where decisions are being made sometimes, because a lot of times the information and about required to make decisions is distributed, and the decision making is centralized, which then creates a discrepancy and a problem.
Well, I think there's also a lot of times where leadership or managers think that they have moved decision making down, but employees don't feel like they've had a clear communication that they're able to make those decisions. And so there's that unclear where the decision is supposed to be made. And so everybody just kind of stands around waiting for somebody else to make it.
Lisa, you were commenting on kind of the internal rules that organizations have, and it does relate to kind of roles and responsibilities, doesn't it? You're on
Yes.
mute.
Yeah, yes, it does. And a question that I raised earlier, which is how we think about things has a lot to do with what drives our behaviors. So I think as leaders, we can say we want to push decision making down, and we want leaders at all levels, but our linear structure doesn't send the same message. And so the behaviors that people have learned through that linear structure are going to drive their behaviors before our words and our changed behaviors as leaders in terms of driving significant change. So I feel like there's a piece to this that if we could, it's almost like it's going to be a constant effort to try and drive that message of autonomy, because we have to mitigate what the structure is saying to them based on their experiences and history. And I know what I'm bringing up as a topic doesn't have an easy answer, but maybe that's the piece of it, again, about how do we make this a few clear, specific rules that if we can really drive those home, then the structure will become less of an impact, and how we want things to be done will become more the reality.
Yeah.
This reminds me, actually, there's an index, but I forgot its name. It's about like lateral communication potential, regardless of like hierarchical structure in an organization to support decision making. I think it was developed or it became to prominence when airline safety was being discussed between, let's say, Far Eastern cultures and sort of more Western cultures, where like first officers wasn't, feeling comfortable criticizing a mistake of the captain, and there's an accident as a result, even though they knew there was going to be an accident almost. So I don't know, maybe that's kind of like the gist of what we're trying to discuss here a little bit. Like Israel has the highest rating in that index, for example, where regardless of where you are in our organization, you just reach out, talk, criticize, and so forth.
Yeah. Jen, you might want to comment just on the autonomy as it relates to fairness and inclusion, as well. There's it's maybe part of the philosophy or leadership, but basically are all employees included and that kind of thing. She may not either be on mute or something. I know she was on the line, but I don't see her right now. So Alice, we probably ought to move on. So we can stay on the agenda, move to the next category. Good comments.
Yeah, that sounds good. So we will move down to purpose. And this one, of course, a lot of it was about people feeling that their values and the organizational values really were aligned in a lot of ways. And this is where we also decided to put sort of the change management aspects of it, that people are positive about changes, that they're open to reassignments. And I think the reason we put it in purpose is because if you really are enthusiastic about sort of the purpose of the organization and meeting the goals of the organization, you're more open to changes that you would feel could potentially get you there. And so that's the second on here where it says change management, and that employees and management share a commitment to an enthusiasm for positive change. Again, not just change for change's sake, but changes that could help you fulfill the mission of your organization. And then also part of that is really aligning your mission and what you guys are passionate about to what the community wants and the community needs. And so that's the next one down here, that employees value the input from the community they serve and understand that their work benefits the community. And so, all of these really have to do with that linking to a very specific purpose and community need, and linking that with what the employees value as well. So I don't know if people wanted to talk about it overall or focus just on one or two of them. And again, I mean, this is difficult because, of course, it also goes into sort of that the equity conversations that have been going on a lot in our next fairness goal. But we decided to put it in purpose because it is that sort of like, why are we even doing this work category.
Well, you brought up change, Alice, change management as being a key category in purpose. So the goal is to try to strive for those mission, vision, values that are basically, being connected with and identify where change and improvement is needed. But it's basically your statement, employees and management share a commitment to and enthusiasm for positive change. That's easier said than done, right? But it's definitely connected.
And if I recall, Alice, you and Don were talking about change readiness, which could be really, when we move, we're going to need to kind of close, finish the maturity model that we've spent quite a bit of time on it, and then move on to the assessment. And that's where the connection is to the materials that you had mentioned about change readiness and things like that.
Let's see, Jen Zukowski has an audio issue, but she has a comment. you know, and it's kind of like a couple of Mark Pulling's comments earlier, you know, but it'll come up in fairness as well.
Yeah, and Lisa is making a comment there that if we reach the desired state, that's level 5, then we won't need change management anymore. And I guess that's what that's almost, you know, although change management, the category we're trying to say in the level 5 here is that they're so committed to enthusiastic for change, you don't need to manage it; it just happens. And obviously, when we go down to, you know, other levels like level 1, it's like they're not even ready for change yet; they're like resistant.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to create more process for it, right? Lisa, were you going to say something?
Well, no, I think the comments are all good. That it's more an issue of what are we ourselves? What are our current mental models that we hold that cause us to see things a certain way? And we tend to go in a linear fashion. So that's why I think change management has been around and as prevalent as it is, because we come up with a change at the top and then we try to cascade it down through, and you know, they're not prepared in the way you would want them to be if they were going to come up with the idea, be part of coming up with the ideas, right? It's like change management often strikes me as we're going to do it to them, and how can we do it with the least amount of resistance and greatest amount of acceptance. And when we truly put these together in a strong way and can walk the talk, I don't think we'll need change management. I think that the employees that we were worried about resisting will be part of helping us adapt to all the changes that are coming at us in the world.
It's interesting that you say that, because what I've also seen is that employees are ready for change, and they have to they find resistance in leadership. And that's not when change management, like you said, is adopted because
right.
the leadership doesn't support the change. So that's it's interesting that you have to think about it from both directions.
I think that's really an interesting connection to the other topic that we have, change management, and we will look at that. It's traditionally viewed as a process, but this input will be very useful. So I think perhaps we can look at the last category, and then I provided a link. I can provide it again where the current version of these files resides, and then everybody can provide their comments there. In the next couple of weeks, we would like to kind of wrap this up and move on to assessment methods. So it'll be. Sorry,
Cello?
I was just going to say real quick that the column to the right here that's in white that we haven't talked about is just a comments column. So everybody can go in there and type in their comments and give their input, and you can make that column as big as you want in order to get your comments in there.
Yeah.
Cello, real quick, if I can make a quick comment on the first, I think it's the first fairness one that where we were sitting. It may have been covered. I've been distracted here with email, but the first bullet says all voices are equitably valued, and the third bullet is the special consideration. I kind of think that may be a problem. It sounds on the face of it non-equitable to give special consideration.
Well, I think that's the difference between equality and equity. An example I'd like to think of is when you are having a discussion about community needs, you should be listening to community over maybe people within the organization. But when you're talking about like designing a bridge and you need to know what size bolts to use, you really should be listening to the engineers more than the community members. And so, you know, there are these times when equity does not mean equality.
Well, that's not what I was driving at, is if it's equitable, the first bullet on its face is utterly correct. That it is something that we need to aspire to if we're not there. But the third bullet just seemed to kind of run a little bit against it. We're still within the organization. We're still talking about employees in that context. But I think what we're maybe trying to say is something that might strike the special consideration, that we just make sure we give them consideration. Special is slippery to me, and we don't have to get in a debate here. I understand that, but it sort of jumped out at me. And
so you're saying if we accomplish the first one, then
yeah,
the third one isn't really needed, is kind of what you're saying, Mike?
Possibly. Or if we want to leave it, just don't, just be careful of the wording, of course, as always.
So
Yeah.
it seems, Mike, that the key word is the word special.
Yes.
And again, these are comments that have been provided, as you know, by
Right.
So maybe we can either consider, clarify, or maybe modify the word special because it may implicate different weights.
Yeah.
And I think your point is, if it's equal in number one, then it's special would imply unequal here. So maybe we can look to see if clarification of what that word special means, or maybe use a more neutral word.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just all for noting it and moving on. I don't want to tie it up. But,
Okay.
yeah.
I think one way we could look at this is this category seems to be speaking to getting the input, reaching out and making sure we're hearing all the voices. And then that third point actually starts to head in the direction of decision making. How are we going to do decision making? So if we keep it on the inclusion part, and decision making should be in another, it deserves its own space, I think.
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, Mike, it could, we're beating it to death, but it could mean also that leadership seeks out underrepresented voices and gives them special consideration in decision-making, like field employees, like different categories of people that have not had the voice, that kind of thing. It's not just valuing them, but it's actually making sure that you include them. Anyway.
Okay.
What else in this fairness category? We have a few more minutes.
So, the second one is really about specifically focusing on equity and diversity initiatives and inclusion work. The third one, and I know we've all struggled with this because I think trust has shown up a couple of times in this spreadsheet. I think there was one that was further up that had a little bit to do with trust also, but I think the earlier one was more about trusted employees. This is more about trust that you can be your full self at work, regardless of your various identities. So I know that, again, it's hard to parse out and figure out kind of where to put different things in here. But this is really more about, being able to wear your big crazy earrings and feel comfortable with that, and nobody's gonna call you crazy for wearing them. That's just one example.
Okay, so I have a proposal. It seems like people might need more time to look at this and provide some thoughts. That's why we have this notes and comments in the F column, and you can just enter your comments into those into this spreadsheet, which I provided the link for. If you didn't get the link, let me know, or I can repost it. And then we will use these notes to fine tune and adjust these categories and statements, so that in a couple of weeks we could hopefully come forward with a first draft of what a maturity model could look like. We can always, and then move on to assessment methods. And then always, as we look at the assessment method, we might want to go back to the maturity model and tweak things so it's not cast in stone, but just to kind of keep moving forward and being able to generate the products that we would like. maybe not strive for perfection on the first try, but just allow it, get as many comments now as possible, and then be able to come back and adjust it later.
Yeah, Mert said that he got a note saying workbook cannot be opened from the link that you sent, but let's deal with that, outside the meeting maybe, and make sure that it, can be accessed. Cello and, well, Lisa and Alice and everybody, I mean, Mark made a comment, which was what we were actually going to just touch on for a minute. And Alice, in the way you laid this out, you were dealing with the individual and the organization, and we've had discussions about the overlaps. And one of our issues is, do we completely separate workforce from organization culture, or do we, link them more closely together in terms of the maturity models? And so maybe just throw that out there and get a little feedback, because there are these relationships that have been identified. So, I mean, Mark, you might want to jump in, and comment on that, or others.
Well, I will say that there's definitely areas of commonality. As a matter of fact, the subject we were just talking about a moment ago was actually, I was working on it yesterday. So I think what the important thing is to just make sure we don't lose anything between the two. I don't think we necessarily need to draw hard lines. I think we can recognize that it can exist in both, and one has it's more thinking about perhaps how the individual views it, and the other is, have we created the organizational climate which enables that? So in other words, is there organizational support for people to have a good development plan? Is there organizational support for bringing all the voices into the conversation, right? You can have that on an individual basis, but not necessarily from an organizational perspective. So I think once we've kind of got these prepared, I think we can look at them, and then we can kind of divvy it up if we want to, or we can have them land in both too, so that we don't lose sight of those things. That's my thought.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've been thinking about that a little bit, and it's one of the reasons we put sort of the individual and the organizational one as separate columns, to make it easier to think about how to do that later. But I also feel like eventually, when people are using this, like, let's say you're an organization and you come across this work a year from now and want to figure out, where you are in a maturity, you might only identify one of these and think like, we're just going to tackle culture and not really even look at the rest. And so if an organization does that, I would rather that it be overlapping and that they get everything, rather than assume that everybody's going to be looking at everything together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, also one of the things we'll have to consider again is we'll have to have methods to assess these things. And traditionally, assessment methods for workforce, the methods have been separate from the methods that they've been using to assess organizational culture. And it may be a good discussion to see if we want to have one maturity model that has two assessment methods for different pieces, or we have two maturity models that each has its own assessment methodology. But we can then find ways to combine them and stuff like that. So the primary reason why we have workforce and organizational culture as two different topics is because that's what utilities a year ago, or whenever it was, decided they wanted to look at. But we need, and also it lined up with traditional ways for assessment methods, because once we have the maturity model, we have to have an assessment method to figure out where we are on this scale. So we can have these discussions, maybe another workshop as we're integrating these two areas and see whatever makes sense. Lisa, what do you think?
Yes, I think I referred to the idea of making it simple enough so that people can retain and use it in their how they're approaching their work. And so I think we tend to split things up more than we need to. So if there's a way in which we can lump some things together so that we can come down to a few things and maybe, you know, this, I'm not saying this is the solution, but when you think about what helps an organization succeed, what are the really critical things that it needs? Well, we all know it needs a vision and a mission. It needs the capacity to carry out that mission, and it needs to learn from what's going on so it can adapt and make adjustments. And I like to think about the simplicity of that is what we're going to be focusing on, and how we want to do our work needs to be falling in those bigger buckets. And then you can, you know, there's parts obviously within that, but I was struck with the fact that we're making complexity out of this. And it's not just us starting that. I realize that that's kind of been the way all the transformational leadership management things of, you know, they come at us that way too. But if we can put some things together and make it easier and simpler for folks to realize, here's the important things to focus on to transform our organizations to what they need to be in this complex, fast-moving world that we're now in.
Yeah, it may be a combination of things that are that on different levels, and that the granularity on the level that you describe would be very appropriate to provide a summary so people have a sense of, you know, the sort of big ideas. And then underneath that, we have a structure that has enough details that it's actionable and we can actually measure things and assess things and move forward and stuff like that. So on the higher level, to have something that's simple and easy to understand would be highly beneficial, and we can combine it with, and it's just most of us have been educated in the sort of Western tradition, which is about breaking things into pieces and then studying each piece. I mean, that's right. What we do.
Unfortunately, that isn't the way the real world works, though.
Well, but you know, we have kidney specialists and skin specialists. It's just the way we are. And
yeah, I'm not being critical, Cello. I'm just saying, but more and more, it's apparent that, you know, we're trying to make the world behave linearly, and it doesn't.
No, exactly. And I'm not saying. I'm just saying perhaps we can start with this sort of traditional decomposition, but to have a holistic idea that you described would be very beneficial. And as we move forward, we can make adjustments that allow to show sort of partly traditional path, but also integrated in some way.
Just a quick point is that we're doing something that's pretty unique and because here, and it really can contribute. But if you take, I think it was Alice or Mark's point, that if you take what's over on the right, and if those are statements, those are, and then it's almost like the previous columns for individual and organization are descriptors, a description of what that means. And depending on whether you're doing something just for workforce or for organizational culture or both, then you could basically include those as a description of what is behind those, those statements over on the right. So there are choices just in terms of simplicity versus complexity, in terms of how we approach the assessment model, and that's a discussion still to be had.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I actually sent a link to a folder, not to a file. So I'm a little bit surprised that the error message that Mert is getting. I will look into it and test. This is in the same space that we've used all along, so I'm a little bit confused why there will be issues. And
yeah, if it helps, Jill, I clicked on the same file you had open on the screen, so that's when I got the message.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you did get into the folder.
Or not yet?
Yes, I was able to reach the folder, just not the file.
Okay, then I know what to work on. I see Zonetta has her hand up.
Yes, sir. I just want to let you know that, can't even type a message in the chat either.
Oh,
Yeah, because that's how I was gonna make my comment, which is nothing pertinent really or significant, but I just wanted to let you know that as well. So it's a lot going on there today for whatever reason. Thank you.
okay. Yeah, thanks, Zanetta. I'm sorry if anybody else had problem. This is completely within the
Microsoft Teams.
within Microsoft Teams, and I'm not sure why the chat wouldn't work. Can a couple of other people also try to just type something in? Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem to work for everybody, so I'll do my best to look into it and see what the problem may be. And Mert is right. I do love Microsoft.
Well, Cello, you already talked some about this, but in our last 5 slides, just in terms of next steps, did you kind of summarize that?
I'm sorry. There's somebody has 2 microphones open, so there was a bit of feedback. Would you mind repeating, Scott?
Yeah, we have 5 minutes left, and maybe talk about next steps. You've already introduced that topic. Maybe you've covered most of it, but if you want to, talk to this group about next steps, you mentioned in the next 2 weeks, people getting back feedback, through that folder and the notes column that's there, and then looking forward, what are you seeing?
Yeah, we had we had a presentation on that with the next steps. I think at one of the meetings last week. So what I would suggest is I'm going to prepare a note to send to everybody in terms of this is the timeline. It's in that spreadsheet that you and I were looking at, from the comments. And so I'm going to prepare what you said in writing and send out to then everybody. So I'm not at the place where I have it kind of cleaned up and structured, but our next step in general will be to look into assessment methods next. And I see that Lisa has a comment that it may be related, the issues with chat. With the browser one is using it, that Google Chrome does not work well with Teams. So
yeah, all I could say is I have 3 different ones because certain softwares they tell you, well, this isn't going to work well with your WAM application or whatever. And so I've ended up with 3, and sometimes I'll go to Teams using a different one than I traditionally would, not planned. It's just the way it works out. And all of a sudden, like today, I'm on Chrome and I couldn't share the file. I had to paste the image into the chat. I couldn't attach the file itself. So that's just an example of weird little idiosyncrasies that I've been running into with different browsers.
Okay.
So
go ahead, Scott.
Well, I'm just going to say that in the survey that you did, Cello, that one of the lowest scoring item in the feedback, they were all pretty high, but we got a 3.5 on fun. And so, Alice sort of volunteered to give a Jeopardy question or something. We were thinking, what can we do that's a little different, that would liven things up a little bit? And we could do it in other team calls and things, but I don't know. You're not really prepared for this, probably, Alice, but you could cut it right. Not to put you on the spot, but that was a thought. And if people have other thoughts that would, what's our Jeopardy question for the day, or whatever.